This happened not even a month ago. I'm a senior in high school, and I've lived in Nevada my whole life. There's not much to do here, but one thing my friends and I have always been into is urban exploring. We'd seek out abandoned buildings, old service tunnels, dead malls, anything that felt forgotten. We'd climb through broken fences, take pictures, and sometimes sneak up to the roofs or down into basements. It wasn't about breaking stuff or doing anything illegal. It was just about the vibe. The only guy in our group who always found the weirdest places was Charles. He was the quiet, mysterious type, showing up with locations none of us had heard of. Half the time, I didn't even ask how he found them. One day, he sent us a screenshot from a sketchy Instagram account. Low followers, blurry photos, and creepy comments under the posts. The caption on the post in question said something like, "Dozens of abandoned mine shafts in the Mojave Desert if you know where to look." According to Charles, he'd been in contact with the account, and whoever ran it had given him some areas to check out. That was all Charles needed. He was instantly obsessed with the idea. So that Saturday, it was me, Charles, and our friend James. I had a Wrangler perfect for off-road desert driving, so we took that. We didn't have a specific address, just a general area and a pin drop somewhere in the middle of the Mojave. The spot Charles marked was way out in the desert, far from anything. We turned off the main road almost half an hour earlier, and the dirt path we were on barely looked like a road anymore. We drove around for what felt like forever. No signs, no structures, no landmarks, just endless nothing. I kept checking my phone, even though I knew we had no service. James, in the back, was getting more irritated, telling Charles this was a waste of time and that he'd been scammed by some troll account. Charles insisted we keep looking, so we did. He's always been stubborn with navigation, so I figured I'd indulge him a bit longer. Just as we were about to call it quits, James pointed out something to the right. At first, it looked like more rock and sand, but as we got closer, we saw it a collapsed wooden structure built into the side of a slope. Part of the entrance had caved in, but you could still see a dark hole behind the support beams. It wasn't huge, but it was definitely man-made, a mine shaft. Charles didn't say anything at first. He just pulled out his phone, opened the offline map he downloaded when we had service, and dropped a pin on it. Then he turned to James and said, "Told you." James said he just got lucky, but even I had to admit it was kind of crazy. We'd been driving in circles in the middle of nowhere, and somehow we'd found one. I parked a few yards from the entrance on a flat patch of dirt. We climbed out and geared up. Charles had even brought masks for us to wear. The three of us walked up to the mine, and it looked even sketchier up close. Charles picked up a rock and tossed it in. We waited. A few seconds later, we heard it clang 3 times, then nothing. It was really deep. Charles looked back at us and said if we tripped on the way down, we were probably dead. We started the descent. Luckily, the shaft wasn't a straight drop. It sloped down at a steep angle, but not so much that we had to climb hand over hand. The ground was loose and uneven, with old wooden beams lining parts of the wall. Surprisingly, they seemed sturdy. The deeper we went, the colder and quieter it got. It was eerie down there. We couldn't even see light from the entrance anymore. Eventually, we reached what felt like the bottom. The shaft leveled out and opened into a wider tunnel that branched off in a few directions. It looked exactly as you'd imagine old support beams every few yards, rusted rails half buried in dirt, and a thick layer of dust on everything. There were scraps of wood and metal scattered around, maybe parts of old carts or tools. It smelled stale, if that makes sense. Honestly, I didn't realize how much of a blessing the masks were until that point. We picked a tunnel and started walking. None of us said much. We were just exploring. There wasn't much cool stuff down there. The place looked like it had been cleaned out of anything worth taking. But then we heard something faint, further down the tunnel, like something being dragged. At first I thought I imagined it, but Charles had stopped too. James motioned for us to turn off our flashlights, so we did. We stood in total darkness, listening. The sound came again. A scraping, like metal or wood being dragged along the ground. It was hard to tell with the echo, but it seemed to be getting closer. We stood there in the dark for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. It was hard to tell. The scraping kept coming, slowly getting louder. It didn't sound too close, but that didn't make it less terrifying. Then James accidentally flicked his flashlight on and off again. I wanted to kill him. The scraping stopped, and everything went silent. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud metallic clang from deep in the tunnel, like whatever was being dragged had been dropped. Right after that came the most awful, demonic scream I'd ever heard. It barely sounded human. We turned and ran, not caring how loud we were. I've never run faster in my life. I could hear footsteps behind me, and I thought I was going to have a panic attack. I was in the back, trying to keep up, and then I tripped on something. One of my shoes came off, and I struggled to stay upright. I didn't have time to go back for it, so I kept going, ignoring the pain in my foot. Up ahead, Charles and James had reached the incline and were climbing. I practically threw myself up the slope. Climbing half barefoot was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Excruciating. I picked up a new splinter every few seconds. If not for the adrenaline, I don't think I would have made it out. By the time I reached open air, my foot was shot. James and Charles had to nearly carry me to the car. I couldn't drive like that, so James jumped in the driver's seat. I barely got the door closed before he floored it. I don't think we were followed up the shaft, but we weren't sticking around to find out. We drove in silence to the nearest hospital. The pain was so bad I thought I'd pass out. I ended up needing a tetanus shot, and even after cleaning my wounds and removing the splinters, I couldn't walk normally for days. A few days later, once I could walk without limping too much, James told us he'd dropped his wallet near the shaft, probably when he was helping me to the car. He hadn't said anything at the time, but now he figured it was worth going back. Just to the entrance, no way were we going inside. So, the three of us drove back out there using the pin Charles had saved. James' wallet was nowhere in sight, but we found something else, my shoe, sitting a few feet from the mine's entrance. I cautiously walked over and picked it up. It was torn up, like something had bitten into it. There were literal teeth marks and entire chunks were missing. We didn't stick around much longer after that. None of us can come up with a rational explanation. You might say it was a homeless person living down there, but how would they stay alive so long? There was no food. What would they eat? Charles said the Instagram account never responded when he messaged about what happened. It'll be a long time before I do any urban exploring in the desert again. I've always been a rugged kind of guy, loving the outdoors. To me, a vacation is a camping or fishing trip, not some extravagant resort excursion. My girlfriend of 6 months, Tiki, shares my love of nature. That's probably one of the main reasons we started dating, if I'm honest. A couple of weeks back, we decided to do something different. We drove out to the desert to camp for a few days. We'd done forests, mountains, lakes, but neither of us had experienced the open, silent, dry isolation the desert offered. It felt like something we had to try at least once. One of the main reasons we chose the desert was the stargazing, which we both love more than anything. Even when we first started dating, we'd drive out past town to lie on the hood of the truck and watch the stars. When we read that this spot was far from any towns or light pollution, it was a done deal. I found a place online that was supposedly remote but legal to camp on. No amenities, just open land, some fire rings and stars. Sounded perfect. We packed up the truck with our gear and made the 3-hour drive early that Friday morning. The last hour or so was on a dirt road that felt like it went on forever, with no house or sign of human life in sight. That was half the appeal. By the time we found the campsite, it was late afternoon. The place was completely empty, just as I'd hoped. The first couple of nights were exactly what we wanted: warm days, cool nights, clear skies. We'd sit by the fire with a couple of drinks, pass a joint back and forth, and talk about dumb stuff or lie back and stare at the sky. Not having a schedule or distractions was really refreshing. And yeah, we'd fool around a bit in the tent. That was part of the fun too. It felt good to be disconnected. Both nights, though, we heard something strange, not close but way out in the distance. A low, drawn-out sound, like a howl or moan. It didn't sound like a person, more like an animal. The first night, we both paused when we heard it. Tiki looked at me like, "Did you hear that too?" I nodded, but we laughed it off. I said it was probably a coyote or mountain lion, and she agreed. The same thing happened the second night, around the same time. We chalked it up to desert wildlife. There's all kinds of stuff out here we're not used to hearing. It was unsettling, but we weren't going to let it ruin the trip. The third night, I woke up to footsteps outside the tent. Soft at first, just a couple of faint crunches, like someone walking slowly over dry dirt. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't an animal, it was too steady and slow. I didn't move. I wanted to grab the flashlight, wake Tiki, and say something, but I couldn't. I was frozen. My heart was pounding, and every muscle felt locked up. The steps didn't circle the tent, they just stopped a few feet away. For a long time, there was nothing but silence. I stared at the tent ceiling, barely blinking, waiting to hear something else. Whoever or whatever it was didn't make another sound. I waited for what felt like forever, praying they'd walk away. But then, out of nowhere, I heard a flick, the sharp, unmistakable sound of a lighter. A small orange glow appeared through the tent's fabric, maybe waist-high, a few feet off to the side. Whoever was out there held the flame steady for a few seconds, then started waving it slowly. I didn't move, I just stared, trying not to make a sound. Then the flame got bigger, way bigger, from a flicker to a glow, like they'd lit something, maybe a torch. Then, without warning, they dropped whatever they were holding. I heard it hit the dirt with a dull thump, and a second later, the tent lit up. The heat came fast, faster than I expected, and within seconds, the fire started spreading. That snapped me out of my haze. I woke Tiki, and she immediately realized what was happening. We scrambled, no time to think, tossing our stuff out of the tent onto the dirt. I'm not sure we got everything. We sprinted out while the fire spread. Tiki grabbed a water jug and dumped it on the fire while I tried stomping out anything that had caught. Eventually, we got it under control. Half the tent was ruined. I grabbed the flashlight and scanned the area around the tent, looking for whoever had just tried to kill us, but there was no one. At least no one I could see. Tiki started packing our stuff, and I quickly followed. We walked in what we thought was the direction of the truck. There weren't any landmarks, and it was dark, so we were practically guessing. After a few minutes, it became clear we were turned around. About 10 minutes into walking, I heard it again. That same distant scream from the first 2 nights, only this time it didn't stop. It kept going, like an animal in constant pain. Then another scream started from somewhere else, and then another. They were all coming from behind us, but it was clear there were multiple things out there. I didn't say anything, I just grabbed Tiki's arm and moved faster. By some miracle, we found the truck, we threw our stuff into it, and I drove off as fast as I could. I couldn't go too fast. The road was rough, and without any light besides my high beams, every dip and bend felt like it could flip us. After what felt like forever, we hit a main road. I didn't stop speeding until I saw other cars. Tiki was holding it together, but I could tell she wanted to cry, and I was doing a bad job of consoling her. We called the police to report everything. All I can think about is how, if I weren't such a light sleeper, Teki and I could have been murdered that night in the desert. This is important context for what I'm about to tell you. I've always been a little suspicious of my mom's past. Suspicious isn't exactly the right word, but I can't think of a better one. She was born in Mexico and spent her childhood there before moving to the States alone to pursue an undergrad degree. The rest is history. She found work, met my dad, and has lived in America ever since. I don't know much about her life before America, and part of me thinks that's by design. She avoids talking about her past entirely, dismissing questions with a joke or changing the subject. Growing up, my dad always said it was because she had some childhood trauma better left undiscussed. I believed that for the longest time. Why wouldn't I? But as I got older, I grew more curious and marveled at how skilled my mom was at dodging those questions at family gatherings. Here's what I do know: she lived in a border town somewhere in northern Mexico along the Texas border, a place with a rough reputation. The closest I've gotten to knowing anything about her parents is a joke she told a few times when I was younger. She'd laugh that her dad's side of the family were the politicians, and her mom's side were the crooks, but she could never tell which was which. I never read into it as anything beyond a cynical political joke, but as I grew older, I wondered if there was more truth to it than I'd thought. Her dad worked for the government in some capacity, and she never spoke about her mother, not once. The only other piece of information I have is a name. I'm not going to write it out, so I'll call him R. One night when I was around 10 or 11, I woke up to use the bathroom. As I passed our living room, I heard my mom speaking quietly. I didn't understand Spanish, but she repeated R's name multiple times, like she was talking about someone, not to them. All the lights were off, so I couldn't see her, but I could hear her. Even though I knew it was just Mom, my young self was scared of the dark, so I instinctively flipped the light switch on. She didn't scream or react to the light, like she was expecting me. Instead, she immediately hung up the phone and glared at me with a look I'd never seen from her. She told me to go back to bed, and I did. That's basically all I know about my mother's past. A joke, her dad's vague occupation, and the name R. What I'm about to tell you happened almost a year ago, and it's been on my mind a lot recently. I'm from Arizona, lived there my whole life. I was a year out of college, driving through the desert to meet an old college friend. It was a long drive, road trip hours, and I was tired of music. I'm not a podcast guy, so I was cycling through my contacts, calling friends and whatever girls I was talking to. Eventually, I called my mom. We're both really into soccer. So we were talking about the upcoming Champions League fixtures and how exciting the matchups were. She's got serious knowledge of the sport, so we can talk soccer forever. Out of nowhere, I saw two pickup trucks blocking the road ahead. It didn't look like an accident, so I wasn't sure what was happening. I worried someone might need help, so I slowed down as I approached. My mom was still on the phone, but I hadn't told her what was going on. I stopped my car and sat there, wondering if it was a good idea to get out. Before I could do anything, 3 men sprang out from the trucks, all holding guns. I froze, then realized another car was quickly approaching from behind. I was unarmed, so compliance was my only option. One of the men tapped his gun on my door, motioning for me to get out. The other 2 stood further back. I put my hands up and slowly got out. By then, the car behind me had caught up and parked a little ways away. The man barked commands in Spanish, but I didn't understand. I consider my inability to speak Spanish one of my biggest failures, especially as a Mexican American. In that moment, not being able to communicate with my assailants, I wanted to die. It didn't take a translator to know what they wanted, though. Before I knew it, they had my phone, keys, wallet, and other belongings, and it looked like I'd be stranded in the desert with no escape. One of the men got into my truck, and that's when things took a turn. I realized I hadn't hung up the phone with my mom, and since my truck was still running, she was still on the line. I watched through the driver's side window as the man reached toward the screen as if to hang up, only to pull back like he'd changed his mind. He seemed to be listening. I connected the dots. My mom must have been speaking to him. Eventually, his lips started moving, and I realized they were having a full conversation in Spanish. I couldn't hear anything with the windows and doors closed, but I'm 90% sure he repeated ours name a few times, like my mom had said it, and he was confirming it. At some point, the other guys noticed what was going on because they stopped guarding me and approached the car. The guy inside rolled the window down and stared at me as he spoke to the other 2. After he finished, all 3 turned and stared at me, sizing me up. The conversation didn't last long after that. They hung up the phone and walked back to me, handing back all my stuff, including my keys. The only thing they took was the cash in my wallet. One of them looked at me, smiled, and in a thick accent said, "Tax, he did it." I'd never been happier to lose all my cash. As I drove away, all 3 cars, including the one behind me, sped off into the desert away from the road. I tried to memorize their license plates, but none of the cars had any. I was still in shock. After a few minutes of driving, I called my mom back and demanded an explanation. She said she'd simply threatened to call the police, as she was tracking my location and knew exactly where I was. I told her that was obviously nonsense, and insisted she tell me what they'd really been talking about. She stuck to her story, saying most of the Spanish was just her pleading her case. Even though I didn't believe her, there was nothing I could do but accept it. I asked her to call the police for me, and she said she would. We ended the call, and I drove the rest of the way in silence. Honestly, I blocked that experience out of my mind for as long as I could, but over time, I couldn't anymore. I'm becoming more convinced that my mom had some tie to a Mexican gang or cartel growing up. And scarier still, maybe that tie didn't end when she left Mexico. She knows I'm not stupid, so I don't know how much longer she expects to keep up the charade. I feel like I should just ask her, but I'm really worried about what kind of tension that might create, or worse, what kind of world I might be getting myself into if she tells the truth.